Welcome to another episode of Humans Are Whack. Before we dive in, I want to know something from you. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your answer in the comments. Here's why. Our stories today come from different parts of the globe, and it's fascinating to see how human behavior, no matter the culture or the country, can be equally whack. So let's get started. Story 1. The man who tried to rob a bank with a lemon in 1995. A man named MacArthur Wheeler walked into two Pittsburgh banks and robbed them in broad daylight. No mask, no disguise, nothing to hide his face. Surveillance cameras captured every detail of his crime, clear as day. But here's the twist. Wheeler thought he was invisible. Why? Because he had rubbed lemon juice on his face. He believed that, just as lemon juice could be used as invisible ink on paper, it would somehow make his face invisible to cameras. When police showed him the footage of his robbery, he was stunned. His words were simple, "But I wore the juice." This bizarre act of misplaced confidence was so ridiculous that psychologists actually studied it. From it came the concept of the Dunning-Kruger effect, the idea that people with the least knowledge are often the most confident in their abilities. A foolish mistake became the foundation for one of psychology's most famous principles. Proof that sometimes stupidity doesn't just make history, it makes science. So here's the question. Was this just one man's blunder, or the perfect example of how ignorance can be the most dangerous thing of all? On our second story today, it's a tale so absurd it sounds like a joke, but it's completely true. A man once decided to take himself to court. Yes, literally. He sued himself, and somehow, he won. The year was 1995, and the man's name was Robert Lee Brock, an inmate at a correctional center in Virginia, USA. Sitting in his cell, he came up with a strange idea. He wanted compensation for breaking the law. According to his reasoning, he had violated his own civil rights by getting himself drunk and committing the crime that landed him in prison. So, in a handwritten legal complaint, he sued himself for $5 million. His argument? He claimed that as both the plaintiff and the defendant, he was responsible for his own suffering. But since he couldn't pay, he demanded the state pay it on his behalf. The court took the case seriously enough to review it, and though it was eventually dismissed, Brock's stunt became one of the most bizarre legal actions ever recorded. It raised real questions about the limits of law, and about how far people will go when they feel powerless. It's both tragic and hilarious. A man so desperate for attention, justice, or maybe redemption, that he tried to turn the system inside out. But here's where it gets interesting. His logic, twisted as it was, wasn't entirely wrong. If responsibility and guilt both belong to him, then where does accountability really begin or end? This case may have been absurd, but it became a strange reflection of humanity's endless ability to bend rules, twist logic, and find loopholes, even when the fight is with themselves. So here's the question. Was he insane, clever, or just hopelessly human? Because when you step back and look at it, maybe suing yourself is just another way of admitting that sometimes we are our own worst enemies. On our third story today, we travel to a small town with a big dream. A dream that, somewhere along the way, completely lost direction. This is the story of a bridge that led absolutely nowhere. It began like most grand projects do, with ambition. The town wanted progress, a new bridge that would connect their isolated community to a growing highway system. There were speeches, promises, and budgets approved with smiles and handshakes. It was meant to be a symbol of hope, development, and the future. But as months turned into years, something strange happened. The road that was supposed to meet the bridge was never built. Funds disappeared, paperwork got lost, and the construction site turned into a monument of confusion. By the time the bridge was complete, it stood proudly in the middle of a field, ending in thin air. Locals called it the bridge to nowhere. It became a running joke, a piece of architecture that led to nothing but embarrassment. Visitors came not to admire it, but to laugh at it. Millions of taxpayer dollars, spent to build a structure that served no purpose. But this wasn't just one town's mistake. Similar bridges to nowhere have appeared all around the world, from Alaska to China to rural Europe. Each one built on the same foundation: miscommunication, greed, and poor planning. It's a simple story with a deeper meaning. Humans have an incredible ability to dream, to plan, to build. But we also have an equally powerful ability to lose sight of why we build in the first place. Every bridge to nowhere is a reminder of something greater, that progress without direction is just motion. And sometimes, in our desperate rush to move forward, we forget to check if there's even ground ahead. So here's the question: is it worse to build nothing at all, or to build something that leads to nowhere? Because when humans start building without purpose, even the strongest bridges can end in empty air. On our fourth story today, we step into a mystery that began with panic and ended in disbelief. A woman vanishes. A community searches. News outlets spread her photo across the country. And when she's finally found, the truth is far stranger than anyone expected. This is the story of a woman who faked her own kidnapping just to get attention. It started in 2016 when Sherry Papini, a 34-year-old mother from California, was reported missing. Her husband found her phone, her headphones, and strands of hair scattered near a jogging trail. The signs pointed to something sinister. Friends and neighbors joined the search. Strangers online shared her story. The media called it one of the most shocking disappearances in years. For weeks, people feared the worst. Then suddenly, 22 days later, she reappeared, bruised, emaciated, claiming she had been kidnapped by two women who held her captive at gunpoint. Her story spread like wildfire. She became the center of national attention, a survivor, a symbol of resilience. But as investigators dug deeper, cracks began to form. Her story didn't line up. Her injuries didn't make sense. And then, the truth came out. She had never been kidnapped. She had staged the entire thing. In reality, she had been hiding with an ex-boyfriend hundreds of miles away. She faked her injuries, lied to police, and watched as her community grieved and searched for her, all for sympathy, for validation, for attention. When she was finally caught years later, the country was stunned. What would drive someone to orchestrate their own suffering? To manipulate an entire nation's empathy just to feel seen? Psychologists called it a case of extreme narcissism, the need to be the center of attention at any cost. But beneath that label lies something deeply human: the hunger to be noticed, to be cared for, to matter. In a world where people measure worth in attention, she found the most destructive way to get it. And for a brief moment, she had it all: the headlines, the sympathy, the spotlight, until the lie collapsed. So here's the question: was she simply desperate, or was she a mirror reflecting something uncomfortable about all of us? Because in the age of attention, truth can become just another casualty. On our fifth story today, we meet a man whose confidence in his dog went far beyond the ordinary walk in the park. It's one of those stories that makes you pause, laugh, then wonder, how did this even happen? This is the story of the man who tried to train his dog to drive. It happened in New Zealand, in a quiet suburb near Auckland. A group of animal behaviorists had successfully trained dogs to operate modified vehicles as part of an animal intelligence experiment. It was a controlled setup, intended to test how far canine problem-solving could go. But one man, watching from afar, thought he could take things a step further on his own. Reports say he began teaching his dog, a Staffordshire Terrier named Rex, how to steer his old hatchback. He'd sit the dog on his lap, guiding its paws on the wheel, laughing as it reacted to movement. It started as a joke, something to amuse his friends and neighbors. But soon, it became an obsession. One night, after what police later described as a few too many drinks, the man decided Rex was ready for the real thing. He placed the dog in the driver's seat, started the engine, and let the car roll forward down a quiet residential street. Moments later, chaos. Neighbors called emergency services after seeing a car weaving erratically through traffic, and when the police arrived, they couldn't believe what they saw. The man was sitting in the passenger seat, calmly holding a beer, while his dog sat behind the wheel. When questioned, the man reportedly said, "He's a good boy. He just needs practice." Luckily, no one was hurt. The dog was taken safely into custody. Yes, that's actually what the report said, and the man was arrested for reckless endangerment and driving under the influence. But what makes this story fascinating isn't just the absurdity, it's the psychology behind it. Humans have always tried to teach animals to do human things, to speak, to dance, to drive, even to fight wars. It's a strange reflection of our need to see ourselves in everything else. We want control. We want to prove that we can shape life around us, even when it makes no sense. It's easy to laugh at a man who tried to teach his dog to drive, but it also reveals something deeper. How thin the line is between creativity and insanity, between brilliance and foolishness. Because in the end, maybe what he really wanted wasn't to make his dog human, but to feel, even for a second, like life could be that absurdly simple. And that, more than anything, is the heart of it. The human need to push boundaries, even when the boundaries don't need pushing. On our sixth story today, we descend into the depths, not of the ocean, but of human obsession. It's a story that begins with genius and ends in tragedy. The kind of story that makes you wonder where the line really is between innovation and madness. This is the story of the man who built his own submarine and took it too far. Peter Madsen was an engineer, inventor, and self-proclaimed dreamer from Denmark. He was known locally as Rocket Madsen, a man who dared to build rockets, submarines, and machines that most people could only imagine. To the world, he was eccentric. To his followers, he was a visionary. For years, he had been building his own private submarine, a massive, hand-built vessel he called UC-3 Nautilus. It was his masterpiece, his proof that human ingenuity didn't belong only to corporations or governments. It belonged to anyone who dared to try. But beneath that ambition was something darker, something unstable. In August 2017, Madsen invited a journalist named Kim Wall aboard his submarine for an interview, a chance for her to document the life and work of a modern-day inventor. She stepped aboard expecting a story. She never came back. When the submarine was later found partially sunk, Madsen was rescued, but Kim Wall was missing. His story changed repeatedly. First, he said he dropped her off safely. Then he claimed there was an accident. But as evidence surfaced, the truth emerged, and it was horrific. He had murdered her aboard his own invention. The very machine he built to represent freedom and progress became the stage for one of the most shocking crimes in modern history. Why would someone destroy everything they built, and everyone who believed in them? Some say it was ego. Others say it was control. But whatever the reason, it showed something deeply unsettling about human nature, that the drive to create and the desire to destroy often exist in the same mind. Peter Madsen's submarine still stands as a symbol, not of engineering, but of the danger of unrestrained obsession. It's a chilling reminder that intelligence doesn't always mean morality, and that the human mind, when isolated long enough in its own ambitions, can sink deeper than any submarine ever could. So here's the question: at what point does brilliance drown in darkness? Because when humans chase their dreams without limits, the water isn't the only thing that can pull them under. On our seventh story today, we enter the strange world of science and obsession, a place where curiosity can easily turn into something darker. This is the story of a man who looked at the limits of nature, stared straight through them, and said, "Why not me?" This is the story of the man who tried to clone himself. In the early 2000s, the name Dr. Panayotis Zavos began appearing in newspapers around the world. A fertility specialist from Kentucky, Zavos claimed he was on the verge of a breakthrough that could change humanity forever. He wasn't interested in cloning sheep or mice. He wanted to clone a human being. To him, it wasn't madness. It was progress. He believed cloning could help families who had lost loved ones, parents who wanted a second chance, couples who couldn't conceive, people who wanted to live on through a genetic copy of themselves. But the scientific community called it reckless, dangerous, unethical. That didn't stop him. In a secret lab, hidden from regulation, he began experiments using human cells and surrogate mothers. He claimed to have implanted cloned embryos into several women. He even announced that one was possibly pregnant with a human clone. No proof ever surfaced. No baby was ever shown to exist. But the world was shaken. The thought alone, that someone might already be walking among us as a human copy, was enough to send shockwaves through science, ethics, and religion. Some called him a fraud. Others called him a pioneer. But behind it all was one haunting truth. He was willing to do what almost no one else dared, play God. And that's the question that makes this story so disturbing. Where is the line between creation and imitation? Between love for humanity and obsession with power? Zavos claimed he was doing it for science, for compassion, for the future. But in his interviews, there was something almost defiant in his tone. A man who wanted to be remembered not for his success, but for the fact that he tried. Even now, no one knows if his experiments ever truly stopped. No records, no evidence, just rumors. And maybe that's the scariest part. Because if he wasn't the first, maybe someone else already succeeded, quietly, somewhere, without ever telling the world. So here's the question. If you could make a perfect copy of yourself, would you? And if that copy began to think, feel, and want the same things you do, which one of you is truly you? In trying to play God, humans often forget one simple truth. Even if we could clone life, we can't clone a soul. On our 8th story today, we explore something both fascinating and terrifying: the limits of the human body and the quiet madness that comes when we try to overcome them. This is the story of the woman who tried to live without sleep. It began as an experiment, a challenge she set for herself. Inspired by reports of record-breaking endurance tests and the myth that great minds never sleep, she decided to push her body past its natural limits. Her name was Trisha Reese, a graduate student studying human physiology. At first, it was simple curiosity. She wanted to see what would happen if she stayed awake for as long as humanly possible. No drugs, no stimulants, just willpower, cameras, and a journal. For the first 2 days, everything seemed fine. She laughed, documented her progress, and spoke about the project like a professional. But as hours turned into days, something began to change. By day 4, her speech started to slur. She described hearing faint voices that weren't there, whispers behind her own thoughts. Her sense of time blurred. The walls in her apartment seemed to breathe. By day 6, her eyes were red, her movements twitchy and uncoordinated. She claimed to see someone else, in the mirror, a face that looked like hers, but didn't blink when she did. Doctors begged her to stop. Her body was collapsing, but she refused. She wanted to see the edge. On the 7th day, she collapsed mid-sentence while recording a video diary. Paramedics found her barely conscious. She had been awake for 169 hours. Her body temperature had dropped, her pulse was unstable, and her brain was showing early signs of psychosis. She survived barely, but she never fully recovered. For years after, she reported chronic insomnia and vivid hallucinations that came and went without warning. Trisha's experiment proved something chilling. That sleep isn't just rest, it's reality maintenance. When we take it away, the world unravels slowly from the inside out. Scientists have since confirmed what her body already knew, that even brief periods without sleep can mimic schizophrenia. The mind begins to invent reality to fill the silence where dreams should be. But what made her do it? Maybe it was curiosity, maybe ambition, or maybe the same human flaw that drives all our stories: the refusal to accept limits. We build bridges to nowhere, we fly with fake wings, we live with lions, and sometimes we just want to see how far we can go before something inside us breaks. So here is the question. If you could know what your mind becomes without sleep, would you dare to find out? Because in the dark corners of exhaustion, the human mind doesn't just stay awake, it begins to wake up to something else. On our ninth story today, we explore a question that's haunted philosophers, scientists, and dreamers for centuries. What if a human could truly disappear? But for one man, this question wasn't a metaphor. It was an obsession. This is the story of the man who tried to become invisible. His name was Liu Bolin, a Chinese performance artist who earned the nickname the Invisible Man. But this isn't about stage tricks or invisibility cloaks. It's about one man's desperate attempt to vanish, not from sight, but from a world that refused to see him. In the early 2000s, Liu's art studio was demolished by the government during a redevelopment project. Everything he had worked for, gone overnight. He wasn't famous. He wasn't powerful. He was just another artist erased by the system. So, he decided to make that erasure his art. He began painting himself, head to toe, to perfectly blend into his surroundings. Brick walls, grocery store shelves, police stations, billboards, construction sites. Each photograph took hours to prepare. He'd stand perfectly still as assistants carefully matched the paint on his body to the background behind him until he literally vanished into the world around him. To most, it looked like a strange optical illusion. To him, it was a protest, a silent scream against invisibility, the feeling of existing in a world that doesn't care whether you re there or not. But the project began to consume him. He spent months isolated, painting, posing, dissolving into his surroundings. He once said, "I paint myself to disappear, because no one would notice if I did." The irony is haunting. The more invisible he tried to become, the more the world started to notice him. His images went viral. He became famous for disappearing. Psychologists say his story reveals something deeply human, the need to be seen, even when you claim you don't want to be. Because sometimes, invisibility isn't about hiding. It's about wanting someone to look closely enough to find you. Liu's art lives on today, breathtaking, surreal, unsettling. But the deeper message remains. We live in a world where billions of people feel unseen, unheard, unnoticed. And some will go to incredible lengths, even vanish into walls, just to prove they exist. So here's the question. Would you rather be seen for who you are, or disappear completely until the world wonders where you went? Because invisibility isn't about science fiction. It's about loneliness, painted in plain sight. On our 10th and final story today, we step into the strangest kind of science, the kind that blurs the line between curiosity, delusion, and desperation. This is the story of the man who tried to time travel using his microwave. It began in Japan in the late 2000s with a man known online only as Kenji. He was a quiet, eccentric electronics enthusiast who spent most of his time on anonymous message boards. One night, he started posting about a theory, a wild idea inspired by particle physics, microwave radiation, and a handful of pseudoscientific papers. He believed that microwaves, when modified and pulsed at a certain frequency, could bend time. Not enough to travel through centuries, but maybe seconds. It sounded like fiction, but Kenji didn't treat it that way. He began experimenting, dismantling a kitchen microwave, rewiring its circuits, adding coils, mirrors, and a primitive cooling system to handle the heat. He called it the Chronowave Project. For months, he posted his progress online. Late-night photos of wires tangled like veins, digital clocks next to warped metal, notes filled with equations that didn't quite make sense. People laughed. Others encouraged him. A small following began to form, an audience curious to see if madness could somehow turn into discovery. Then one night, his final post appeared. A single sentence. If this works, you'll never read this message. And then silence. No one ever heard from him again. His online accounts were deleted. His apartment, according to rumors, was found empty. Microwave still plugged in, clock flashing midnight. To this day, no one knows if Kenji walked away from his project or if he lost himself in it, metaphorically or otherwise. Some say he simply vanished from the internet, disillusioned. Others like to imagine something else. But beyond the mystery, there's something profoundly human in his story. That stubborn, irrational hope that maybe, just maybe, we can cheat the rules of the universe. That time doesn't have to move only forward. That regret can be undone. Kenji's Microwave was never about science. It was about longing, to rewrite moments, to fix mistakes, to touch the past, even if it burns. And that's the quiet tragedy of humanity. We never stop trying to outsmart time, even though it always wins. So here's the question. If you could travel back, even for 1 minute, would you do it? And if you did, would you ever come back? Because maybe the most whack thing humans ever do is believe we can escape being human at all. And that was Humans Are Whack, Episode 2. Another 10 stories. 10 more moments that prove just how far curiosity, ego, and imagination can push the human mind, and how easily brilliance can turn into chaos. From the man who sued himself to the one who tried to bend time with a microwave, every story shares one uncomfortable truth. Humans never stop testing the limits. We build, we break, we experiment, we fail, and somehow we call it progress. Maybe that's what makes our species so fascinating. We're not just creators. We're contradictions, capable of both genius and absurdity, often in the same breath. But before we go, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Not just for statistics, but because every comment you drop reminds us how wide this strange web of humanity really is. From small towns to cities, from deserts to high-rises. Every single viewer is another part of the whack story we retelling together. So, drop your location in the comments. Let's see where this episode reached. And while you're there, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves the bizarre side of reality as much as you do. Because the next episode goes even deeper. Stranger stories, darker psychology, and the kind of human behavior that makes you stop and ask, what were they thinking? This is Humans Are Whack, where we don't just tell stories, we hold up a mirror to our own madness.